Welcome back to Brainstorm, brought to you by Chairshot Gaming. My name's CJ, and let's just jump into this one. I'm actually kind of excited to talk about this subject. Right now, what I want to propose to you, audience members, is about superhero franchises. And right now, there's been a lot of discussion going on about whether certain franchises should be kept outside of the main universe. And while again this is one of my many unpopular opinions, but I think it does bear some weight for discussion. One of the franchises that I think immediately comes to mind, and I think a lot of people have had a hard time with, is the X-Men. Right now there's been probably the most childish war going on between Marvel and Fox. This has just gotten out of hand at this point. Both companies have made me not like them nearly as much. I am a lifetime Marvel fan. I've always loved Marvel comics since I was, gay, like just little tiny guy, little tiny CJ. And I still, love Marvel to this day, except that they're letting me down a little bit. X-Men was kind of my gateway as a kid into Marvel Comics. I was never really huge on Iron Man. I didn't know who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. About the only current franchise that I actually did like as a child was Captain America. I really was not into almost anything that the Marvel Universe has been putting out, except that the current cinematic universe is making me like them. They made me like Iron Man, especially because Robert Downey Jr. just is that character. Ant-Man, I giggled when Marvel was like, "Oh, we're gonna make an Ant-Man movie." I'm like, okay, Ant-Man, oh sure, But then I was like, holy crap, this is probably one of the best out of the entire, Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, so far, Ant-Man's one of my favorites. Guardians of the Galaxy, never even heard of them. I don't really like cosmic heroes. I've never really been into Superman. I've never been into Silver Surfer. I've, sort of liked Fantastic Four here and there, like when the Thing fought the Hulk or something like that. But, I never really cared about, the galactic stuff because I'm just like, you know what? That's when characters get way too powerful. The storylines get way too convoluted. They just go into stuff I'm a pretty nerdy dude. And when I'm going that's a little too geeky, I was like, you can take that to the bank. The cosmic heroes are just never, ever my thing. And yet, Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm going to say it right now, it's going to be the Indiana Jones of our time. They can have these movies going on for a little while, and they're always going to deliver. They're always going to be good. Guardians 1 was great. Guardians 2 was great. I have a hard time picking which one I like more because I like them both. They're both so good. But that said, though, X-Men were my thing as a kid. That was what I gravitated to. This was back, I was born in 85. So the 89 Batman had come out and bought that hook, line, and sinker, man. I was so into Batman and Batman was so cool. And then the following year we got Ninja Turtles. And Ninja Turtles, that was my shit. I love Ninja Turtles. And I still will go back and watch the first Ninja Turtles movie and be just as entertained as I was when I was a kid. Sometimes for reasons that aren't the best kind of reasons. Baby Sam Rockwell going, regular or menthol. That's hilarious. I still love that kind of stuff. But that said, though, right around that time, also, the Fox Kids programming block put out the X-Men animated series. It has not held up very well. If you go back and watch it now, it's kids these days will have no idea what I'm talking about because you go back and watch it, it kind of blows. It's not all that great. The animation's pretty lackluster. There's a lot of animation fails in it. And even some of the storylines and the dialogue, they don't gel anymore. It's just not, it was meant for the decade that it was created in. It was meant for the 90s. Everything about it's 90s. I think a lot of the choices that the X-Men cartoon made were based on work that was done, in the Rob Liefeld era. Like Cyclops has a million pouches and it's never explained what's in them. Cable and his enormous shoulder pads for absolutely zero reason. Things like that. Just, I mean, it didn't come off well. But back then, as a kid watching this X-Men show, it really captured my imagination of everything that superheroes could be. And I got into the X-Men comics, and I was lucky enough to have a comic shop that was literally like 3 blocks from my house. And I used to ride my bike up there, once a week and spend any allowance money I had, and I'd get stupid trading cards that were going to be worthless in a year. I would get comic books that never accrued any more value than what they had back then. Just pointless crap that I just spent my money on because I loved it so much and I was so into it. And X-Men was just really my thing. And of course, X-Men was going to be that thing that was going to lend itself better to a movie than maybe any of the Marvel franchises, save for Spider-Man and maybe the Punisher. Although Spider-Man and the Punisher can obviously carry a film or even a television series just fine on their own. X-Men was one of those things that I think transcended a lot of the comic book ridiculousness, I guess. Like, when things get a little too comic booky, I think that it was better that it did in regards to X-Men, as opposed to other things having to cut down on that a little bit. So Marvel sold the rights to Fox, because Marvel had big plans, and especially at the time, Marvel's trying to get a lot of things going around that time. They were trying to get things in their animated department. They were trying to get things straightened out a little bit with their comics, which had taken a hit around that time. And at the same time, they had people within Marvel, namely Avi Arad and Kevin Feige, who wanted to make an Iron Man movie. I mean, they had the idea for it. They wanted to do it. They lacked the money to do it. And this was before Disney ever bought out Marvel. And selling the rights to certain characters, selling the rights to Spider-Man to Sony, selling X-Men to Fox, selling Fantastic Four to Fox, selling Punisher to Lionsgate, as well as Ghost Rider. Daredevil, I think, was also Fox. Selling the rights to these characters and letting those companies then run with it and make their money off of it. That's what got Marvel the kind of money that they really needed in order to produce Iron Man. And then once they did, I mean, it was huge. I mean, that sold like gangbusters, and it sold so much that Disney took notice. And Disney's like, there's a future in this, and we want to do it, and we're going to buy Marvel. And it was, what was it, like something like in the $1 billion deals. I mean, it was crazy. So they bought Marvel, and the rest is history. But then now, Marvel, after making their cinematic universe and after producing television shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and, the Netflix shows Daredevil, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Jessica Jones, after producing those shows and those movies, now Marvel wants their properties back. They sold them off. They made that sacrifice to make the money that they needed to give us something great and something wonderful. But now they want those properties back, and these companies are really hesitant to do so because they've made money off of these properties. Fox has made a lot of money off of X-Men. Sony's made buku dollars with Spider-Man, probably enough to keep them from falling under as a company. They've had a lot of problems over the years. And they might, honestly, Sony might owe its entire existence right now to Spider-Man. And, that and PlayStation. But Marvel wants all of this back. And so far, they've been able to acquire some of the rights. Punisher ended up reverting back to Marvel after Punisher Warzone pretty much, failed to meet any expectation whatsoever. Ghost Rider ended up going back to Marvel. Daredevil finally went back to Marvel because Fox couldn't produce a second Daredevil movie in time. And that awful, Fan Four Stick movie was basically that kept Fantastic Four within Fox's hands. But Fox has been continuously producing movies of X-Men, and much to Marvel's chagrin, Fox's X-Men movies have been getting better and better, with a few missteps along the way, but nothing cataclysmic. Nothing like X-Men: The Last Stand was, where fans of the franchise, both like comic and moviegoers alike, were just absolutely disappointed in its execution. It hasn't been that bad since, and this was with the advent of First Class, and then Days of Future Past following that up, and then lately with X-Men Apocalypse, and then the spin-off movies that they've produced like Logan and Deadpool. These movies have done amazingly well, and Fox is really on the up and up when it comes to producing these movies and really being able to sell them. And while like fans are pretty much divided on X-Men Apocalypse, myself included, I mean, I saw some merit in it. It had some good points. It had probably some of the best Magneto stuff that we've seen in a very long time. It gave us a very acceptable and awesome Nightcrawler. It had some of my favorite characters in it, even if they didn't get a lot of screen time and or lines. But I still like seeing Archangel. I like seeing Psylocke. I like seeing Storm with a mohawk this time. And the actress actually did a very good job with the lines that she was given in the movie. You know, the weak point of it really being Apocalypse and his inconsistent powers. Like at one point he kills 3 dudes with sand. Then later on, I guess he just forgot about that ability when he's being impaled by Magneto and then fried by the Phoenix Force. Oh, sorry, spoilers for a movie that I'm sure you're not going to care about. But yeah, so I mean, Fox is making so much money off of the X-Men and doing so well with it. Why would they want to play ball with Marvel? You know, they are literally Marvel's only real competition in the game. Amazing Spider-Man 2 did so poorly that Sony was like, we need help. Sony played ball with Marvel. And, you know, Spider-Man Homecoming is, as of this filming, is in theaters right now. And I have not been able to see it yet. And I really, really want to. But I'm also really, really poor. So, by the way, like and subscribe. But I haven't been able to see Spider-Man Homecoming, and I'm really wanting to see that. However, this is Sony playing ball with Marvel. It's taking Spider-Man and throwing it into the Marvel Universe and allowing that to actually happen, allowing those universes to combine, and that works. That works for Spider-Man. That works just fine for Spider-Man, because Spider-Man was always a hero that, like, some of the best stories ever told with Spider-Man always involved some kind of a team up. Whether he was teaming up with the Avengers, whether he was teaming up with the X-Men, whether he was teaming up with the Heroes for Hire, Captain America. I mean, one of my favorite comic book series out of Spider-Man all time has to be Maximum Carnage. And there are so many other heroes in that story arc that it's like, yeah, Spider-Man as a character seems very dependent upon them having this huge universe. That's not the kind of... Spider-Man's not the problem here. The problem does come down to some certain other things. If like right now, Marvel's been really pushing that magic is just science that science hasn't figured out yet. That was established in Thor, and it was expanded upon in Doctor Strange. My problem with that is, well, now Marvel's talking about throwing in Blade. Now Marvel's talking about throwing in the Night Stalkers, possibly Morbius. And they're trying to get into that darker, more supernatural realm. And I'd really hate if they were to just say, oh, it's just more science that science hasn't figured out yet, and stop using that excuse. Sorcery has been a part of the Marvel Universe since its inception. I mean, there's been things going on, that never really made a whole lot of sense. You just kind of had to accept it because it was a comic book, and Stan Lee said so. I mean, that was basically how it's always been. But now they're trying to put the spin on it and trying to make it a little bit more sciencey and less, about the mysticism behind it. Why not just leave it separate, man? Like, at that point, like, Blade was an awesome movie on its own. I don't think there's a person alive that's not like, oh, the Blade movie is, it's pretty much sucked. And Wesley Snipes was a terrible Blade. No. Wesley Snipes was an awesome Blade. So awesome that the man's almost 60 years old and people still want him to reprise the role. Okay? Blade was amazing, and people really loved it. And that really helped get comic book movies back into the public eye after Batman and Robin just about diminished it completely. So if they're going to be doing a Blade series, it seems to me that it would make more sense to just make it its own contained universe the way it was before. I can't say that I would like to see Captain America all of a sudden go, wait, vampires? Like Dracula? I get that reference. No, that doesn't work for me. A person like Tony Stark, who just had to deal with going through a portal and seeing aliens, and he's all messed up over that and PTSD'd out in Iron Man 3. What happens when he finds out that freaking vampires are real? Is like he's just going to be like, oh, it's not the weirdest thing I've ever seen. No, it is the weirdest thing he's ever seen. Aliens are one thing. We have an enormous universe. There's obviously other planets. Most likely one of them has to be, just by, process of elimination and all that. Like, there has to be at least one planet with some life on it. Now vampires, though, it's a little less plausible. And I feel like Iron Man's character, Tony Stark, would be completely beside himself if all of a sudden it was like, well, us Avengers got to fight the vampires this week, kids. Like, you'd be like, no, what? And for whatever reason, Marvel seems to think that, like, this mysticism thing is going to go in really well. I don't really see that happening unless they fool around with it like they did Doctor Strange and turn mysticism into science. Now, back into my previous point, X-Men being a self-contained universe, I always thought it was a little strange, in the comics that Fantastic Four was just immediately accepted by the media and by people as being cool heroes with special abilities. How the Avengers were always looked at as like the pillars of the superhero community, despite other little missteps like Tony Stark getting drunk in the Iron Man suit. How like Spider-Man was kind of back and forth between the public hates him, the public loves him, the public hates him, they love him. And same with Daredevil. But yet the X-Men, it was just immediately like, no, mutants are bad. People hate mutants. Like, how dare you get your powers through birth and not through radioactive spiders and other things that would just give you cancer. It made no sense to me. It made no sense to me as a kid and makes no sense to me as an adult. And while, yes, the thought of having Wolverine run around with the Avengers is kind of a cool, kind of a cool thought to have. And games like Marvel Ultimate Alliance have, kind of reinforced that opinion. Even still, even while the idea might be cool, the execution's never going to be there, because there's going to be that enormous plot hole. Why is that okay for people who got their powers through other means versus people who got their powers from birth? Why is that such a big deal? And, the X-Men were always an allegory for civil rights. They were always an allegory for gay rights. They were always an allegory for the racial divide. Like, the political messages within the X-Men were always incredibly blatant, enough that a 5-year-old CJ was able to understand it. I mean, it was spelled out for us. And that it wasn't so prevalent in things like the Avengers and in Doctor Strange, and all of these other things. It never mattered, because that wasn't the story that they were telling. With the X-Men, they were telling a very specific kind of story. And mixing those two universes, especially in today's political climate, especially considering that things are so divided, that's not going to go over well. Either way that Marvel wants to cut it, it's not going to go over well. Because you're going to have people on both sides of the fence, and one person's going to be like, oh, the X-Men stands for the liberal agenda, and blah, 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 libtard, we're Republican, love us. And the other side is going to be, you know, like, oh, like the X-Men totally deserve to be here, and da-da-da, and it's just going to create even more of a divide in the comics world than what already exists, which is already a growing problem. Now that said, you know, another issue that I've been having lately is talking about, you know, with the shared universes, DC right now trying to share their universe and coming up with the Justice League thing and all the strides that they're taking towards that. And I know DC movies are more polarized than Marvel's will probably ever be, because DC is the second one to try to attempt it. DC is also trying to rush things to play catch up. While Marvel put out like 7 or 8 movies before everybody was able to come together, to do Avengers and then to do Avengers 2 and so on and so forth. DC was like, 1, 2, skip a few, all right, we're there. And it didn't, I think it was a little too jarring, especially the way that DC tried to pull off their whole shared universe thing. But while this has been parodied to death on YouTube and by comic fans for years, honestly, putting Batman, you know, a man with no powers and a lot of money, next to Alien Jesus, aka Superman, it doesn't mix. You know, the best stories of Superman are always about this fish out of water story and an alien that has to, with all these cosmic powers, basically if God was one of us, if God was walking around and had to be a normal, regular, everyday person, those are the best Superman stories that get told. You know, how he deals with his normal life, how he deals with being, you know, having to try to fit in with humanity as much as possible, you know, knowing that he's so far superior to them. While Batman, his stories have been all over the place. You know, you got Batman stories that deal with things like insanity. You have Batman stories that deal with things like capital punishment and when what is the line? When does the line become blurred? You know, Batman stories were far more complex than what Superman stories were really ever capable of. And at the same time, there's no way that you can convince me that Batman would ever be able to get into a slug fight with Superman and not be obliterated within a couple seconds. You can't. I don't care how much money he spends on making a armor suit and the whole "do you bleed" thing. I don't buy it. I didn't buy it then, and I don't buy it now. Batman is one of those things that I feel like he needs his own universe. But that said, though, the only reason that Batman's even in the Justice League and the only reason why Batman is even popular is because Batman looks cool. Let's be honest here. Batman is Batman's biggest problem. Batman is Batman's biggest nemesis. His whole character doesn't make a whole lot of sense unless it's what they were going for this whole time and people just never saw it. But it seems like the whole Batman doesn't kill, that being his one rule, he trips himself up with that. Because then how many innocent people end up having to die when somebody like the Joker comes out? You know, how many people have to die when, you know, Mr. Freeze goes on a rampage or whatever the case, like all these different villains, and Batman doesn't want to do what's necessary in order to stop innocent people from being hurt, because while his villains are alive, they will never be rehabilitated, as seen with the Arkham Asylum Serious House for Serious Earth graphic novel, which if you haven't read, oh my God, pick it up. But as seen with that, Arkham's not rehabilitating anybody. Batman sending all these bad guys to the Arkham Asylum is not helping. And it never has. And then they get out and they kill more innocent people, and then Batman beats them up and he puts them back in there. And this was brought up as a pretty main plot point in Under the Red Hood, the animated feature involving the story of Jason Todd and all that. And this is brought up as a theme where the Joker says to Batman at one point, "Are you really going to do it this time? Or are you just going to put me in another body cast for 6 months?" That's a fair point. And it's never really answered. Later on in the movie, Batman says, "If I go to that place, I'll never come back." And the Red Hood argues that I'm not talking about killing Penguin or Dent, just him. Why does he get to live? That's also a fair point. And Batman doesn't have a good answer for that. Because that's the flaw of Batman's character. How many innocent people need to be hurt before Batman just looks like an asshole? Because he is an asshole. And the only reason that fans have really gotten behind Batman is because he has a sweet-ass rogues gallery and he has a cool look. His aesthetic look is awesome. It's everything that a dark comic book hero should be. All right? So much so that you can see the inspiration taken in things like Todd McFarlane's art in Spawn. You know, a lot of superheroes were inspired by Batman. Batman is a very iconic image. But Batman has some plot hole issues that are pretty glaring. And as a character, he's not very interesting. It's just, you just have to assume that Batman is the best at everything. Even though to specialize in all of these things, even if you're a genius and even if you have billions of dollars, would still take you far more years than it has taken Batman to do. I mean, certain things don't make any sense with Batman. And you're just kind of supposed to believe it because comic books and let's move on. But as a part of a shared universe, you know, with guys like the Flash and Superman and chicks like Wonder Woman out there, Batman don't hold up. You know, sorry. But he doesn't. And his universe would be better served as a standalone thing, like it typically always has been. And Batman as a character, I think he needs some changes. I think, honestly, if they were to get rid of that whole Batman one rule thing, he'd be a pretty compelling character. Granted, a lot of people would draw some comparisons with characters like Frank Castle, the Punisher, and rightfully so. But as seen in the Flashpoint series and in the animated retelling of it, in the alternate universe where Thomas Wayne becomes Batman, he is more like the Punisher. And his Batman, for the time that he's there, for the whole like maybe 10 minutes, is a very compelling character and one that I would love to see what happens to. I want to know what happens in that universe, because everything that they did with that was spot on. And I felt like this is the Batman that would make sense. The only issue with that would be if you killed characters like Riddler or Penguin or Joker, then we wouldn't have characters like Riddler, Penguin, and Joker. And that's a fair criticism of my point. You know, and aside from that, so Batman's supposed to be like this martial art badass, like ninja, and that's kind of become a trope that I've also noticed that's transcending. Like I said, Batman is responsible for inspiring a lot of heroes. And one of the things that I've kind of noticed lately is that a lot of these superhero movies and shows especially are incorporating a lot more Asian martial arts into their characters. And at some point you got to start wondering, like, does every thug, like just random baddie, do they all know Kung Fu? Because seriously, it gets a little ridiculous. Like, characters like Iron Fist and Daredevil should be able to, within seconds, incapacitate anybody. And yet, they have these long, drawn-out fights with these guys who seemingly know all kinds of martial arts. It's like, where do they learn that? Like, if Daredevil's so special, then why does everyone know how to fight like him? If Iron Fist is so special, why does everyone know how to fight like him? If Deadpool's so awesome with guns and with his karate, why does he need katanas? I think this is another fair point to bring up. Deadpool and his use of weaponry kind of makes me laugh a little bit because he's made katanas kind of cool again. Katanas kind of went away for a while, but it was always really prominent in the movies as being the end-all be-all sword. And as a person who's a connoisseur of swords, I'm here to tell you that katana's not as cool as it is, and the samurai basically weren't the best warriors in the world either. Now, if you've noticed, a lot of like the martial arts that some of these other characters have been doing has actually not been Japanese martial arts. It's been Chinese martial arts. It's been a lot of kung fu, which has kind of, unfortunately, because I do like Japanese culture, but it has unfortunately proven to be superior to a lot of fixed form Japanese martial arts. And there's this, I think, it must have started with the Kurosawa films and, the Seven Samurai and all that, but it seems like the samurai sword, the katana, has kind of been made a little bit of a legend. It's blown up a lot more than what it was because, you see, the katana came out in Japan during a time when your choices of weaponry were a katana, a naginata or a spear, and a bow, an arrow, and that was it. Like, so katanas only fought katanas or blades on sticks, and they were meant to get around the kind of armor that the samurai would wear in that period. They had a specific purpose and a specific function. But people seem to hail the katana as this masterpiece of blade engineering. I highly disagree. And like, this is like a small point, but it's just kind of like, it's like a nitpick, and it's kind of a pet peeve of mine personally, is that, a piercing weapon will get you more distance quicker and do just as much damage, i.e. death, as the katana will. It'll do it quicker and from further away. At the same time the katana was popular in Japan, the rapier was gaining steam in Europe, and a lot of people seem to always praise the katana because, kind of like Batman, it looks cool, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. I think that's just the metaphor that I wanted to make there. But I hope that you've enjoyed the unpopular opinions that I've given you today. I want to know, what superhero franchise would you like to see added to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Or the DC Universe, for that matter, if you go a little bit more on the DC side of things. And what of these superhero franchises do you think maybe wouldn't work in the cinematic universes of either company? Leave your comments below, like and subscribe. Be sure to check out Chairshot Gaming and all the awesome work that they're doing over there. Again, my name's CJ. Thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And keep it nerdy, guys.